Welcome to Shadow Theory, where forgotten stories, lost civilizations, and ancient truths are brought back to life. In this episode, we journey across the sands of time to explore one of the most awe-inspiring civilizations in human history. This is not just the tale of pyramids and pharaohs. It's a story of gods and legends, war and peace, death and rebirth. From the sacred rise of the Nile to the fall of Cleopatra's throne, we uncover the full saga, spanning over 3,000 years. Prepare for a deep dive into mystery, myth, and memory. This is the entire history of ancient Egypt, as you've never heard it before. Part 1. The Sacred Nile in Egypt's Birth. Welcome to the story of a civilization that lasted for more than 3,000 years. A land of gold and granite, of gods and pharaohs, of deserts and dynasties. This is the story of ancient Egypt, the cradle of human history, a monument to endurance, and one of the most iconic civilizations ever to rise and fall on this planet. Long before the Great Pyramids stood tall above the sands, before Cleopatra's charms swayed Roman politics, and before hieroglyphs spoke to archaeologists, there was the Nile. The Nile is where it all began. Chapter 1. The Nile. Egypt's eternal lifeline. In a landscape dominated by desert, the Nile River is a divine anomaly. Every year it flooded with clockwork regularity, spreading rich black silt over the valley, creating fertile lands in a world otherwise ruled by sand. It was predictable, nourishing, and essential. The ancient Egyptians called it Iteru, meaning the river. It was life itself. Crops like wheat and barley thrived along its banks. Papyrus reeds, used for writing and boat building, grew in abundance. Fishing, transportation, trade, the river gave and gave. And so, from its rhythms emerged the world's first large-scale civilization. People began to settle, to plan, to build. Small farming communities evolved into city-states. Trade flourished, religion took shape, and slowly the Kingdom of Egypt began to form. Chapter 2. Before the Pharaohs. Life in prehistoric Egypt. Before the dynasties, before the temples and tombs, there were hunters and gatherers. Living along the Nile as early as 6000 BCE, these people fished, hunted, herded animals, and cultivated early crops. They buried their dead in simple, shallow graves, often curled in fetal positions, surrounded by simple tools and pottery. Even then, we see hints of belief in an afterlife. Pottery styles, burial practices, and tools began to differ in regions. Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. As time passed, these regions developed distinct cultures. Nakada in the south and Mahdi in the north. Tensions would rise, but so would technology, culture, and the dream of unity. Chapter 3. The Unification of Egypt. By around 3100 BCE, a powerful king emerged in Upper Egypt, known to us today as Narmer or perhaps Menes. He conquered the north and unified the two lands. We know this from the Narmer palette, ceremonial stone slab showing the king wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. In his hands, symbols of conquest. Round him, imagery of domination and divine favor. With Narmer's victory, Egypt became one, not just geographically, but politically and symbolically. This was the birth of dynastic Egypt, the beginning of written history, and from this moment on, the king was more than a ruler. He was a god. Chapter 4. The Role of the Pharaoh. God, warrior, administrator. To the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh was not just a man. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the sky god. He was the protector of Mat, the divine order of the universe. His word was law, his blood was sacred, and his legacy was eternal. But he was also the highest priest, the commander of the army, the supreme judge, and the planner of great constructions. Every pyramid, temple, or decree carried his name. When the pharaoh died, he became Osiris, lord of the underworld, while his successor took on the spirit of Horus once more. It was a divine cycle, endless, unbreakable, as eternal as the Nile. Chapter 5. Mat. The foundation of Egyptian society. More than just a concept. Mat was the heart of Egyptian civilization. It represented truth, justice, harmony, and balance. It was not only religious but political. The pharaoh's duty was to maintain Mat, to keep chaos at bay. Priests invoked it. Judges upheld it. Artists depicted it as a winged goddess, or as the feather weighed against a person's soul in the afterlife. Without Mat, Egypt would collapse into Isfit, chaos, war, famine, and darkness. And so, every temple, every law, every ceremony served one higher goal: to preserve the cosmic order handed down by the gods. Chapter 6. Birth of Cities and Temples. With the unification of Egypt, cities grew. Among the most ancient was Memphis, the first great capital built where Upper and Lower Egypt met. It became a symbol of unity. Temples dedicated to gods like Ptah, Hathor, and Horus began to rise. Early dynasties focused not only on building walls and statues, but on institutionalizing religion and governance. Writing developed, not just pictures on walls, but sacred hieroglyphs. These symbols captured prayers, taxes, royal decrees, and poems. They gave voice to the pharaohs, and they gave memory to the dead. With them, Egypt was not just a place, it was a story being written in stone. Chapter 7. Women in Early Egypt. Unlike many ancient societies, Egypt gave women remarkable rights. They could own property, initiate divorce, serve as priestesses, and even rule. Queens like Nephthotep, possibly Narmer's consort, wielded political power. Goddesses like Isis, Hathor, and Sekhmet represented strength, healing, motherhood, and war. While society was patriarchal, it was deeply dualistic. Masculine and feminine forces were seen as equally vital. Even the pharaoh needed his queen to maintain balance. Chapter 8. Technology, Tools, and Timekeeping. Early Egyptians used copper tools, stone hammers, and red brushes. They designed irrigation canals, measuring tools, and even early forms of geometry to measure land after the Nile's floods. They studied the sky and began to measure time, with calendars based on lunar and solar cycles. They were among the first to divide the day into 24 hours. To them, time was sacred, structured, and tied to ritual. Everything, the seasons, the flooding of the Nile, the birth of a child, had its moment in the divine clock. Chapter 9. The first temples and the rise of religious power. Temples began modest, mud brick enclosures with altars, but quickly evolved into grand architectural feats. Priests, often from noble families, gained immense influence. They performed daily rituals, maintained temple economies, and interpreted signs from the gods. Temples were not just religious centers. They were banks, schools, hospitals, and storage houses. And at the center of each temple, in the darkest inner chamber, stood the cult statue of the god, cared for by priests, unseen by the public, but believed to live and breathe through divine power. Chapter 10. The legacy of Egypt's earliest dynasties. As the first and second dynasties unfolded, kings like Jirden and Khazakimwi built the foundations of the future. They experimented with stone architecture, extended borders south into Nubia, and left behind tombs filled with early hieroglyphs, jewelry, and sacrificial offerings. Though their names are not as famous as those who came later, they were the architects of Egypt's identity, creators of a divine kingship, structured state, and a culture that would endure for millennia. Their silence in modern memory does not erase their thunder in ancient time. Part 2. The Old Kingdom, Age of the Pyramids. As the third dynasty began, a new era of stability and ambition took shape. Egypt was no longer a patchwork of scattered cities and local rulers. It was a centralized, thriving kingdom ruled by divine kings from the rising sun to the setting desert. This was the dawn of the Old Kingdom, often called the Age of the Pyramids, a time when Egypt carved its identity into stone and reached for eternity. It would leave behind monuments so massive, so precise, that even today they defy our understanding. Chapter 1. Pharaoh Djoser and the birth of monumental architecture. The third dynasty's most famous ruler was Pharaoh Djoser, a name etched in legend for commissioning the first ever pyramid. Before Djoser, kings were buried in simple mastabas, rectangular mud brick tombs. But Djoser had a visionary. His architect, Imhotep, was a genius, a polymath, high priest, engineer, and physician. He designed a new kind of tomb, a step pyramid made of stone rising in tiers above the desert. This was not just architecture. This was theology in limestone. Stairway to the gods. Located in Saqqara, Djoser's step pyramid stood over 200 feet tall. The tallest structure of its time, its walls were inscribed with magic spells and ritual texts meant to ensure the king's eternal rebirth. This structure was the prototype. What came next would change the world. Chapter 2. Snefru, the father of pyramid building. After Djoser's dynasty faded, Pharaoh Snefru of the 4th dynasty rose to power. Unlike other kings, he was obsessed with architecture, and he didn't stop at one pyramid. Snefru experimented. His first attempt at Medum collapsed during construction. Unfazed, he began again, this time creating the famous bent pyramid at Dashur. Its angles change halfway up, the result of engineering miscalculations. But it still stands. Strange, sloped and beautiful. Then came Snefru's final masterpiece, the Red Pyramid. Egypt's first smooth-sided pyramid. Its proportions were perfect. Its design would become the blueprint for greatness. Snefru laid the foundation for what his son would accomplish. Chapter 3. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Egypt's eternal symbol. Khufu, son of Snefru, ascended the throne and built what would become one of the most iconic monuments in human history, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It rises nearly 480 feet high. More than 2.3 million limestone blocks were used in its construction, each weighing up to 15 tons. No mortar, no cranes, no modern tools. For centuries, people have asked, how was it built? Some say ramps, others spiral tunnels inside the structure. Some even claim lost technologies or forgotten sciences. But to the Egyptians, it was simpler. It was the will of the gods, guided by divine geometry and endless labor. Inside, hidden corridors lead to a king's chamber deep within. No golden treasure, just red granite, silence, and awe. Khufu was followed by his son Kafir, who built his own pyramid next to it, and possibly carved the Great Sphinx, a lion with a man's head, gazing eternally eastward toward the sunrise. Chapter 4. Pyramid Builders, the workers behind the stone. For centuries, it was believed that the pyramids were built by slaves, but archaeology tells a different story. Massive workers' villages have been uncovered near Giza, complete with bakeries, breweries, dormitories, and cemeteries. The builders were skilled laborers, artisans, and farmers working in rotating shifts. They were fed meat, beer, and bread. They were organized in crews with names like the Friends of Khufu. Their tombs show pride, not oppression. In life and death, they were honored as contributors to the pharaoh's eternal legacy. These were not slaves. These were Egypt's heroes of stone. Chapter 5. Divine Kingship and the Central State. In the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh's power was absolute. He owned all land, controlled all trade, and stood as the sole intermediary between gods and mortals. A massive bureaucracy was formed: scribes, tax collectors, officials, priests, all under the authority of the pharaoh. The state planned irrigation, managed the workforce, and collected grain in national granaries. Temples grew richer, priests gained influence. Art flourished. Hieroglyphs became more complex. This was Egypt in its prime, organized, wealthy, and mystical. Chapter 6. Art and Writing in the Old Kingdom. Old Kingdom art is defined by order, clarity, and balance. Statuary followed strict rules: front-facing .com expressions, left foot forward. These were not portraits. They were idealized vessels for the soul. Tombs were decorated with vivid scenes of daily life: fishing, harvesting, dancing, meant to provide the deceased with everything they needed in the afterlife. Hieroglyphs filled the walls, sacred carvings, each symbol carrying sound, meaning, and magic. Writing was not just information, it was divine speech. It was through these symbols that the pharaohs spoke to eternity. Chapter 7. Life for the Common People. While the king lived in palaces and the priests in temples, most Egyptians lived in modest mud brick homes. They farmed, fished, herded animals. Their lives revolved around the seasons of the Nile: flood, growth, harvest. Children played with dolls and carved toys. Women managed households, prepared food, and brewed beer. Despite the rigid social hierarchy, there was a sense of cosmic order. Everyone had a place in Mat, from the pharaoh to the potter. Even the poorest Egyptian could hope for an afterlife if they lived justly. Chapter 8. Collapse of the Old Kingdom. After 5 centuries of stability, the Old Kingdom began to unravel. Why? Famine struck. The Nile failed to flood. Central authority weakened. Governors of provinces, known as nomarchs, gained too much power and grew independent. Multiple pharaohs ruled at once in competing regions. The economy faltered. Tombs became smaller, less ornate. The pyramids ceased. Egypt slipped into disunity and chaos. Thus ended the Old Kingdom not with invasion, but with silence, fragmentation, and famine. Chapter 9. Legacy of the Pyramid Age. Even in collapse, the legacy of the Old Kingdom endured. The pyramids stood as eternal symbols of divine kingship. The system of governance, religion, and culture it created would guide future dynasties. And the dream of restoring unity would shape Egypt's next renaissance. What the Old Kingdom gave the world was more than stone. It gave the idea that humanity could touch the heavens, not through war or wealth, but through order, faith, and architecture. Its echoes would carry through history like whispers in the wind-blown desert. Part 3. Chaos and Rebirth. The First Intermediate Period and the Middle Kingdom. Civilizations rise on the strength of their structure and fall when that structure cracks. After centuries of divine rule, pyramid building, and centralized power, ancient Egypt entered a time of collapse. This was not the end, but a test. Out of chaos, Egypt would rise again. Chapter 1. The First Intermediate Period. A nation divided. When the Old Kingdom fell, Egypt fragmented. The once mighty pharaohs lost control. In their place, regional governors known as nomarchs declared independence. Rival cities emerged, each claiming legitimacy. To the north, in Heracleopolis, rulers claimed the legacy of Memphis. In the south, Thebes rose under the leadership of powerful local families. Egypt was no longer one kingdom, but many. Unity was broken. Warfare became common. Famine gripped the land. Tombs and temples decayed. The great stone monuments of the past stood abandoned under sand in silence. And yet, even in the darkness, life went on. Chapter 2. The common people and local kings. During this period, we hear new voices. Tombs of provincial officials and middle-class citizens begin to appear with inscriptions and autobiographies. We hear from men like Ankhtafi, a warlord who describes his efforts to feed the starving in his region. Art became more personal, less formal. Writing was more fluid. People buried their loved ones with heartfelt offerings, not royal pomp. Religion shifted. The god Osiris, once associated mainly with royalty, became the god of every man's afterlife. Egypt was changing, not through conquest, but through experience. Chapter 3. The Rise of Thebes and Mentuhotep II. Eventually, order began to return. In Thebes, a strong ruler emerged, Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynasty. He launched campaigns against the northern kingdoms, eventually reunifying Egypt after nearly 150 years of division. To symbolize the rebirth, he built a unique mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahri, a fusion of temple and tomb, carved into cliffs overlooking the Nile. With Mentuhotep's victory, the Middle Kingdom was born. It was a time of healing, a return to tradition, but with fresh wisdom. Chapter 4. The Middle Kingdom, the New Egypt. Unlike the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom who focused on divine grandeur, the rulers of the Middle Kingdom emphasized justice, loyalty, and humility. Pharaohs like Amenhotep and Senusret I strengthened central government, expanded agriculture, and revitalized trade. They built canals, temples, and fortresses. Literature flourished. Tales of heroism, wisdom, and moral guidance were copied in schools across the land. This was a quieter greatness, less about monuments, more about minds. Chapter 5, The Tale of Sinna, A Voice from the Past. One of the greatest works from this era is The Tale of Sinna. It tells the story of an Egyptian official who flees Egypt after the pharaoh's assassination. Living among foreigners, longing for home, eventually he is forgiven and returns to Egypt to die in peace. This story, while fictional, reflects a deep theme in Egyptian culture: exile and return, chaos and restoration, death and rebirth. It mirrors Egypt's own story, a civilization that stumbled but never fell completely. Chapter 6, Osiris, the Afterlife, and the Democratization of Death. During the Middle Kingdom, religious beliefs evolved. Before, only pharaohs were thought to become divine in death. Now every Egyptian hoped to be reborn, judged by Osiris in the afterlife. Tombs included spells, amulets, and model servants to help the dead in the next world. The coffin texts, a new body of funerary literature, appeared. These would later evolve into the Book of the Dead. Death was no longer the privilege of royalty. The afterlife was open to all. If they lived by Mat. Chapter 7, Military Campaigns and Expansion. The Middle Kingdom saw a more aggressive foreign policy. To the south, Egyptians expanded into Nubia, a region rich in gold, cattle, and trade routes. Massive fortresses were built to secure territory. To the east, trade expanded into Canaan, Byblos, and the Sinai Peninsula. Expeditions brought cedarwood, turquoise, and exotic animals. But expansion brought new challenges. More contact came more threats. The seeds of the next crisis were already being sown. Chapter 8, The Art and Architecture of the Middle Kingdom. Middle Kingdom art is subtle and introspective. Sculptures of pharaohs often show worried expressions, lined faces, furrowed brows. Gone is the serene divine mask of the Old Kingdom. These were kings who understood the weight of rule. Temples and tombs were built with more narrative. Walls told stories, not just rituals. Even in decoration, Egypt was evolving. Chapter 9, The Decline of the Middle Kingdom. Toward the end of the Middle Kingdom, centralized power weakened again. Pharaohs became less capable. Court intrigue grew. Foreign groups began settling in the Delta region. Traders, shepherds, and warriors from the Near East. Among them were the Hyksos, whose presence would soon ignite a new chapter in Egyptian history. Once again, Egypt drifted into disunity. Chapter 10, The Second Intermediate Period begins. As the 13th dynasty weakened, Egypt split once more. The Hyksos, ruling from Avaris in the north, brought with them new technology: the horse-drawn chariot, composite bow, and advanced metal weapons. They didn't destroy Egypt, they integrated into it, adopting customs and deities, even taking on the title of pharaoh. But to many Egyptians, they were still foreigners, a sign of divine disorder. To the south, native Egyptian dynasties in Thebes held on to tradition, waiting for a chance to reclaim their land. The battle for Egypt's soul was about to begin again. Part 4, The Glorious New Kingdom, Empire, Heresy, and Immortality. From the ashes of foreign occupation, a new Egypt emerged. One more powerful, more confident, and more ambitious than ever before. This was the New Kingdom, the golden age of pharaohs and generals, of temples and tombs, of revolution and splendor. Egypt would not just defend itself, it would become an empire. Chapter 1, The Rise of Thebes and the Expulsion of the Hyksos. In the city of Thebes, a line of warrior kings rose to confront the Hyksos. Pharaoh Sekhon-Erdau was among the first to fight, died in battle, his skull shattered, a grim symbol of sacrifice. His son, Kamose, continued the war. But it was Kamosi's brother, Amosai, who finally triumphed. He led campaigns to the north, storming the Hyksos capital of Avaris, and drove them from Egyptian soil. Victory restored not just land, but pride. Amos re-established Thebes as Egypt's capital. He reopened trade routes, rebuilt temples, and laid the foundation for a new era. Egypt was free again and ready to dominate. Chapter 2, Amos and the Foundation of Empire. Amos didn't stop at defense. He pursued enemies into Canaan, securing Egypt's borders and expanding its influence. He reorganized the army, built new fortresses, and redistributed land to loyal officials. Under his rule, the military became a path to wealth and status. Generals became nobles. Victory became expectation. Amos passed this legacy to his successors, and Egypt became a military superpower. Chapter 3. Hatshepsut, the woman who would be king. In a world ruled by men, one woman rewrote the rules. Hatshepsut, daughter of Thutmose I, began as queen regent to her stepson, Thutmose III. But she didn't fade into the background. She rose to the throne and declared herself pharaoh. She wore the royal beard, took the title of king, and ruled Egypt for over 20 years. Under her reign, Egypt flourished. Rather than war, she focused on trade, architecture, and diplomacy. She reopened trade routes to Punt, bringing back incense, ivory, and exotic animals. Her crowning achievement was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, an architectural wonder nestled in the cliffs. Though later rulers tried to erase her name, her legacy endured, a testament to power beyond gender. Chapter 4. Thutmose III, Egypt's warrior king. When Hatshepsut died, Thutmose III assumed full power and began a series of military campaigns unmatched in Egyptian history. He led at least 17 major battles into the Levant, crushing rebellions, conquering cities, and turning Egypt into an imperial force. The Battle of Megiddo, he outflanked his enemies and besieged the city for months. It became a model of strategy for generations to come. Thutmose expanded Egypt's borders to their greatest extent. From the Euphrates in the north to the fourth cataract of the Nile in the south, he wasn't just a conqueror. He was a builder, an administrator, and a scholar. He left behind temples, obelisks, and annals etched in stone. Under him, Egypt reached the height of its power. Chapter 5. Amenhotep III, Egypt's golden monarch. If Thutmose was the sword, Amenhotep III was the jewel. He ruled during a time of immense peace and prosperity. Egypt was wealthy, stable, and culturally radiant. He built Luxor Temple, expanded Karnak, and constructed massive palace complexes at Malkata. His reign was marked by diplomacy. He exchanged letters and gifts with kings of Babylon, Mitanni, and Hatti, a web of international prestige. He declared himself the dazzling sun disk and embraced divine kingship to new heights. His wife, Queen Tai, became one of the most powerful women in Egyptian history. Their reign was glorious, but also set the stage for the most radical shift Egypt would ever experience. Chapter 6. Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III, was unlike any ruler before him. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, the solar disk, and declared that there was only one god, Aten. He abolished the old pantheon, closed temples, and moved the capital to a new city, Akhenaten, now known as Amarna. Art changed. Human forms became elongated and exaggerated. Royal family scenes showed affection, intimacy, and realism. But his reforms were deeply controversial. The priesthood of Amun lost power. Temples were abandoned, the nation grew unstable. Akhenaten ruled for 17 years. When he died, the old gods began to stir again. Chapter 7. Nefertiti, the queen of the sun god. By Akhenaten's side stood Nefertiti, one of history's most iconic queens. She was not a passive consort. She held titles like Mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt and appeared in rituals as an equal to the king. Some scholars believe she may have ruled briefly after Akhenaten's death, under the name Neferneferutin. Her famous bust, serene, regal, and lifelike, remains a symbol of Egyptian elegance. Her fate, however, remains a mystery. Did she die in disgrace? Should she vanish into history? No one knows for sure. Chapter 8. Tutankhamun, the Boy King. After Akhenaten's religious revolution collapsed, Child was crowned pharaoh, Tutankhamun, who soon changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amen. Under his rule, the old gods returned. Temples to Amen were reopened. Statues of Aten were torn down. Though he ruled only 9 years and died around the age of 18, his fame would eclipse all others. Why? Because in 1922, his tomb was discovered, nearly untouched by Howard Carter. Inside, golden shrines, chariots, jewelry, and the iconic golden mask. The world was stunned. Egypt's magic had awakened again. Tutankhamun, once a minor king, became a symbol of eternal youth, mystery, and discovery. Chapter 9. Seti and the Temple of Abydos. After the chaos of Amarna, a new dynasty brought stability. Seti, father of Ramesses the Great, restored monuments, reorganized the army, and revived the priesthood. His most famous legacy is the Temple of Abydos, a sacred site honoring Osiris. The temple's walls are filled with lists of kings, cosmic hymns, and deeply spiritual reliefs. Seti was not only a warrior, he was a scholar of religion and tradition. He reconnected Egypt to its roots. Chapter 10. Ramesses II, the Great Pharaoh. Few names evoke power like Ramesses II. He ruled for 66 years, longer than nearly any pharaoh. His monuments are everywhere. Temples at Abu Simbel, additions to Karnak, and statues that rise like mountains. He fought at the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, one of the largest chariot battles in history. Though the battle was likely a draw, Ramesses claimed victory and signed the world's first known peace treaty. He built cities, fathered over 100 children, and ruled with charisma and showmanship. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings was vast. His mummified body, now displayed in Cairo, still commands awe. Ramesses II wasn't just a king. He was a legend in his own lifetime. Part 5. Decline and Foreign Rule. The Fall of Empire. Every empire has its twilight. After centuries of glory, the golden age of Egypt began to fade. The great pharaohs died. Eternal weakness spread. Foreign enemies grew bolder. The Nile still flooded, the temples still stood, but Egypt was changing. The new kingdom would end, not in fire, but in erosion. Slow, steady, and inevitable. Chapter 1. Ramesses III and the Invasion of the Sea Peoples. Decades after Ramesses II, a powerful ruler emerged. Ramesses III, often called the last great pharaoh. His reign was marked by crisis. Mysterious enemies from the west, known only as the Sea Peoples, swept across the Mediterranean, destroying cities in Anatolia, Syria, and beyond. They reached Egypt's borders, and for the first time in generations, the kingdom stood on the defensive. Ramesses III rallied the army and navy. At the Battle of the Delta, Egyptian archers rained arrows from fortified boats, decimating the invaders. Egypt survived, but at a great cost. The treasury was drained, the population displaced. The empire's nerves were fraying. Chapter 2. Economic collapse and the first labor strike. After the wars, something unprecedented happened. In the village of Deir el-Medina, where tomb builders lived and worked, a group of laborers put down their tools and refused to continue. Why? They hadn't been paid. This was the world's first recorded labor strike. Workers wrote to officials, staged sit-ins, and demanded justice. Eventually, food rations resumed. But the event revealed deeper troubles. Economic mismanagement, corruption, and weakening authority. Egypt, once mighty, was cracking from within. Chapter 3. The decline of the priesthood and court intrigue. As the pharaohs weakened, the priesthood of Amun and Thebes grew powerful. Temples owned vast tracts of land. Priests collected taxes, commanded workers, and wielded more wealth than the king himself. By the time of the 21st dynasty, high priests of Amun were acting like kings, burying themselves in royal tombs, commanding armies, and even issuing decrees. Power was fragmented between northern kings in Tanis and southern priests in Thebes. Egypt was again a divided land. The new kingdom was over. Egypt had entered the third intermediate period. Chapter 4. Foreign dynasties and Libyan pharaohs. During this time of fragmentation, Egypt did not vanish, it evolved. Libyan tribes, once mercenaries in the Egyptian army, rose to power. They adopted Egyptian customs, worshipped Egyptian gods, and founded new dynasties. Shoshank I, a Libyan pharaoh, even appears in the Bible as Shushak, who invaded Jerusalem. Despite their foreign origins, these rulers built temples, funded tombs, and maintained the illusion of continuity. But true unity was gone. Egypt's golden days had passed. Chapter 5. Nubia rises, the 25th dynasty. To the south, in Nubia, a new power emerged. The Kingdom of Kush. Kushite rulers saw themselves as protectors of Egyptian tradition. They adopted hieroglyphs, Egyptian deities, and royal customs. One Kushite king Pi marched north and conquered all of Egypt, declaring himself pharaoh and founding the 25th dynasty. He and his descendants, including Taharka, rebuilt temples, restored Mat, and brought stability for a time. But their reign drew the attention of a new empire rising in the east. Assyria. Chapter 6. Assyrian invasion and the end of Nubian rule. The Assyrians, known for their brutal campaigns, soon turned their eyes toward Egypt. In the 7th century BCE, they invaded with terrifying speed. Cities were sacked, temples burned, kings defeated. The Nubian pharaoh Taharka fled south, and the Assyrians installed puppet rulers in his place. Though the Assyrians never held Egypt for long, the message was clear. Egypt was no longer untouchable. She had become a prize in the games of greater empires. Chapter 7. The Saite Renaissance. A brief revival. Despite the chaos, one final native dynasty rose, the 26th dynasty. Based in Sais, in the western delta, under rulers like Samtakai and Necho II, Egypt experienced a renaissance of culture, trade, and art. They hired Greek mercenaries, revived old kingdom styles, and sent expeditions far into Africa. Necho II even began a canal project to link the Nile to the Red Sea, a precursor to the modern Suez Canal. But this revival was short-lived. A greater force loomed on the horizon: Persia. Chapter 8. The Persian Conquest. In 525 BCE, Cambyses II, king of the mighty Persian Empire, invaded Egypt and defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. The Persians became Egypt's new overlords. Cambyses declared himself pharaoh but ruled from afar. Temples were taxed, rebellions were crushed. Though some Persian rulers like Darius I respected Egyptian traditions, the land was now a satrapy, a province of a foreign empire. Egypt had lost its independence. Though brief revolts would follow, it would never fully regain its ancient sovereignty. Chapter 9. Egypt between empires. Over the next 2 centuries, Egypt changed hands many times. It was briefly liberated by native kings like Amyrtaeus, then reconquered by Persians, and finally swept into the ambitions of a young Macedonian general, Alexander the Great. In 332 BCE, Alexander marched into Egypt. He was greeted as a liberator, crowned as a pharaoh, and declared the son of Ammon. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, a new capital for a new age. With Alexander, Egypt's ancient world ended, and a new Hellenistic Egypt began. Part 6. The Hellenistic Age and Cleopatra. Egypt's final queen. Egypt had always been a land of gods and kings. By the 4th century BCE, the ancient rhythms were interrupted. A new world had arrived, forged not on the banks of the Nile, but in the conquests of a man from Macedon. Egypt, once unconquered and divine, would now be reshaped by the Greeks. Chapter 1. Alexander the Great, the foreign pharaoh. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great marched into Egypt with barely a fight. The Persians, who had ruled the land for nearly 2 centuries, were overthrown in weeks. Alexander was hailed as a liberator, traveled to the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa Oasis, deep in the western desert. Their priests declared him the son of Ammon, divine in blood, and chosen by fate. He embraced Egyptian traditions, honored the gods, and founded the city that would bear his name, Alexandria, destined to become one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. But Alexander would not stay long. His destiny lay eastward. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE at just 32 years old, leaving behind a fractured empire. His generals divided his world among themselves. Egypt fell to one of the most cunning, Ptolemy, son of Lagus. Chapter 2. Ptolemaic Dynasty. Greek Pharaohs. Ptolemy Soter took control of Egypt and declared himself pharaoh, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule for nearly 300 years. Though foreign by blood, the Ptolemies embraced Egyptian customs. They portrayed themselves as pharaohs to the people, wore traditional garb and statues, and built temples in native style. But within the palaces of Alexandria, they lived as Greeks, speaking Greek, worshipping Greek gods and ruling through Hellenistic administration. They built libraries, theaters, and universities. They made Alexandria a beacon of learning, home to poets, scientists, and philosophers. It was a fusion of worlds: Nile and Aegean, Osiris and Zeus. Chapter 3. The Great Library of Alexandria. Under the Ptolemies, Alexandria became the intellectual heart of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria, founded by Ptolemy I and expanded by Ptolemy II, sought to collect all the knowledge in existence. Thousands of scrolls were gathered from across Greece, India, Persia, and Egypt. Texts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy were copied and studied. Famous scholars like Euclid, Eratosthenes, and Archimedes studied or worked in Alexandria. It was the first institution of its kind, a symbol of human curiosity, cultural exchange, and ambition. But the library would also become a symbol of loss. Fire, neglect, and war would one day reduce its treasures to ashes. Lester 4. Cleopatra 7, last queen of Egypt. Among the long line of Ptolemaic rulers, one name shines brighter than all the rest: Cleopatra 7. Born in 69 BCE, she was educated, multilingual, politically astute, and fiercely ambitious. While most of her family clung to Greek culture, Cleopatra spoke Egyptian, honored native gods, and ruled as a true daughter of the Nile. She rose to power during a time of crisis. Civil wars, famine, and Roman interference threatened Egypt's independence. To preserve her throne, she formed a legendary alliance in romance with Julius Caesar. The Chapter 5, Cleopatra and Caesar, the alliance that changed history. When Cleopatra met Caesar in 48 BCE, she did so famously. Smuggled into his chambers in a rug, she quickly won his favor. He defeated her rival brother Ptolemy XIII and restored Cleopatra to power. Together, they had a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar. Caesar spent months in Egypt, enchanted by its wealth, science, and queen. But Rome called, and he returned. Only to be assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra was left alone once more, but not for long. Chapter 6. Cleopatra and Mark Antony, Love and War. In the wake of Caesar's death, Rome was torn between rival factions. One of Caesar's most loyal generals, Mark Antony, came to Egypt. Cleopatra and Antony became lovers, partners, and political allies. Their union produced children and scandal in Rome. Antony declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings, giving her territories across the eastern Mediterranean. To many Romans, this was treason. Rome's new strongman, Octavian, Caesar's heir, launched a propaganda war, calling Cleopatra a seductress, a foreign witch who had bewitched Antony. The stage was set for one of history's most famous confrontations. Chapter 7. The Battle of Actium and the End of an Era. In 31 BCE, Octavian's fleet met Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. The naval battle was disastrous for the lovers. They retreated to Egypt, where Octavian followed. As Octavian's armies closed in on Alexandria, Antony committed suicide, falsely believing Cleopatra had already died. Days later, Cleopatra followed. According to legend, she allowed a venomous asp to bite her. Others claim poison. The truth remains unknown. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt became a Roman province. She was the last of the Pharaohs. After 3,000 years of independence, Egypt belonged to empire. Chapter 8. Egypt under Rome. Though ruled from afar, Egypt remained central to the Roman world. It was Rome's breadbasket, its grain feeding millions. Emperors like Augustus, Hadrian, and Trajan visited, often appearing in pharaonic form on temple walls. Temples to Isis, Horus, and Osiris remained active. Traditional priesthoods survived. But over time, Roman customs spread. Latin and Greek became dominant. Taxes increased. Native religion began to fade. And with the rise of Christianity, the old gods began to disappear. Chapter 9. The Fall of Pagan Egypt and the Rise of Christianity. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had become the dominant faith of the Roman Empire. Egypt became a major center for early Christian thought, home to monasticism, Coptic language, and theological debates. But this new religion saw the ancient temples as pagan relics. The famous Temple of Philae, dedicated to Isis, continued worship into the 6th century, until Emperor Justinian ordered it closed. The last priest extinguished the sacred flame. The gods fell silent. Hieroglyphs were no longer read. Old Egypt vanished into memory. Chapter 10. The Silence of the Sands. For centuries, the monuments of Egypt stood mute. The pyramids became curiosities. Temples were buried. Obelisks were taken. Pharaohs forgotten. It wasn't until 1799, when French soldiers uncovered the Rosetta Stone, that Egypt's voice returned. The stone held the key to deciphering hieroglyphs, and in 1822, Jean-Francois Champollion cracked the code. The silence was broken. Egypt spoke again. And since then, she has never stopped speaking. Part 7. Legacy of the Nile. How Egypt changed the world. The story of ancient Egypt is more than kings, gods, and tombs. It is a story of endurance, of a civilization that lived, evolved, and flourished for more than 3 millennia. Empires have risen and fallen since, but few have cast a shadow so long. Egypt has never truly died. It lives on, in our language, our art, our science, and our imagination. Chapter 1. Eternal Symbols. The Pyramids and the Sphinx. It's more than 4,000 years old. The pyramids still stand. When Rome was born, they were already ancient. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, they had watched over the desert for 3,500 years. They are not just tombs. They are messages carved in stone about power, belief, and vision. The Great Sphinx, silent and watchful, has become a symbol of mystery and eternity. No other civilization has left behind such monumental, unyielding testaments to its faith and ambition. Chapter 2. Egyptian Religion and the Afterlife. The Egyptian vision of the afterlife has shaped the spiritual imagination of the world. From the weighing of the heart by Osiris to the judgment of souls, the journey through darkness to light. These ideas echo in later religions, philosophies, and mythologies. The Egyptians believed that life did not end in death. With rituals, magic, and memory, they aimed to conquer time itself. Their tombs were not endings, but portals. Chapter 3. Mathematics, Engineering, and Medicine. Long before Greek geometry or Roman aqueducts, Egypt mastered numbers and tools. They measured the stars, divided the year into 12 months and 365 days, calculated angles, built with plumb lines, and created monumental architecture with stunning precision. Their medical papyri describe treatments, surgeries, and diagnoses. Blending observation with spiritual healing, they were not just dreamers, they were scientists of survival. Chapter 4. Writing and the Power of Words. Hieroglyphs. Sacred carvings were more than symbols. They were believed to carry the essence of what they represented. Writing in Egypt was divine. The god Thoth was said to have gifted it to mankind. To write was to preserve the soul. To name was to give life. This belief that words have power still shapes how we speak, teach, and remember. Without the Egyptian scribes, their gods and kings would be dust. Because of writing, they are immortal. Chapter 5. Egypt in the Greek and Roman world. The Greeks revered Egypt as a land of wisdom. Pythagoras, Plato, and Herodotus visited, studied, and mythologized it. To them, Egypt was the source of ancient mysteries, a place where time moved differently. The Romans admired its art, adopted its gods, and plundered its treasures. Cleopatra herself was used as a symbol of both allure and danger. Even in decline, Egypt remained sacred and feared. Chapter 6. Egypt and Islam and Coptic Christianity. With the Arab conquest in the 7th century CE, Egypt entered the Islamic world. Arabic became the new language. Mosques rose alongside ancient temples, yet the past was not erased. Islamic scholars preserved ancient texts. Coptic Christians maintained a link to the pharaonic world through language and tradition. Even today, Coptic contains words directly descended from ancient Egyptian, a voice echoing through centuries of prayer and chant. Chapter 7. The Age of Rediscovery. For centuries, Europe looked upon Egypt with wonder and misunderstanding. But in 1799, when the Rosetta Stone was discovered, everything changed. Champollion's deciphering of hieroglyphs opened the floodgates. Egyptology was born. Suddenly, tombs were entered, temples cleared of sand, mummies unwrapped, names and dynasties reconstructed. The West became obsessed. With pharaohs, curses, pyramids, and gods, Egypt was no longer just a mystery. It was a history, rich and detailed, thrilling and tragic. Chapter 8. Egypt in the Modern Mind. Today, Egypt is a global symbol. It appears in films, books, museums, tattoos, and video games. The Ankh, the Eye of Horus, the golden mask of Tutankhamun, all are icons of mystery and legacy. But Egypt is not a theme. It is a real place, a living nation, a culture that continues. Modern Egyptians walk the same riverbanks as their ancestors. They build cities beside ancient ruins. They pray in languages built atop words spoken under the stars of Ra. Chapter 9. The human story written in stone. Why does Egypt fascinate us still? Because Egypt was us. In slow motion, across millennia, they loved and lost. They feared death and dreamed of immortality. They built, recorded, and remembered. They turned sand into memory. And in their effort to defeat time, they gave us time itself. To study Egypt is to study our own reflection, stretched across ages, wrapped in linen, carved in granite, and waiting in the silence. Chapter 10. Farewell from the Nile. The Nile still flows, and along its banks, the past whispers. The temples may be cracked, the gods silent, and the language changed, but the spirit of Egypt remains. Not in the stones, but in the questions they ask. Who are we? Where did we come from? How will we be remembered? These are not just Egyptian questions, they are human ones. Perhaps in the end, that is Egypt's greatest legacy. A reminder that we, too, are writing history, one grain of sand at a time. And so, the sands settle. The gods have fallen silent. The pyramids still cast their shadows. The Nile, eternal as ever, continues its quiet journey to the sea. But Egypt never truly ended. Its spirit endures in our stories, our symbols, and our search for meaning. It reminds us that even the most ancient stones were once carved by living hands, with hopes, fears, and dreams not so different from our own. Thank you for joining us on this journey through 3,000 years of wonder, war, and wisdom. If this story moved you, intrigued you, or made you see the world a little differently, then you've already felt the magic of history. This is Shadow Theory, where forgotten truths come alive, and time is never truly lost. Till next time, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, the past is never dead. It's only buried.